Translanguaging and multilingual adolescents. Now, we discussed the example of kindergarten children and how they translanguage and when do they translanguage. Now, let us see whether those things are happening within an adolescent multilingual context or not. So what we see over here is there is this European School of Brussels where the data has been collected. The class relates to this group of adolescents, and what happens in this curriculum that everyone is expected to learn 3 languages, Italian, French, and English, and the subjects are divided for each of these languages, and there is what we call a strict separation of languages for different subjects. Now, what about the bilingual practices or translanguaging practices of this group? Now, what we see that happens is that in formal contexts of the classrooms, discussions with the teacher, when they are being monitored, they use exclusively the languages that have been assigned to them. So they abide by the rules of the language use. But in other informal contexts, we see examples of translanguaging. For instance, if we look at this data, which arises from this conversation of 2 Italian students, both of them now share Italian as the first language, and then they are also learning, let me remind you, French and English language. Now, these 2 adolescents talk to each other. They talk to each other in Italian comfortably as it happens. The context is informal. And then they move on. One of the students takes the cue and somehow moves on to speaking in French. Now, the interesting thing is that there was no need for this student to shift to French because the person he was talking to was also more proficient in Italian than in French. Yet, because this is how bilinguals actually use language, this is how bilingual practices are there in practical life too. Bilinguals or multilinguals, they just use all the linguistic codes, this whole repertoire of linguistic codes that they have in communicating their meaning or adjusting their style, using some sort of sarcasm or pointing out playing out different types of identities. They do translanguage. Now you have this another example of translanguaging between 3 students. One of them is a Dutch, all girls. The other one is Spanish, and the third one is French. Now, the conversation between them is very interesting to sort of record in the sense because we see that one of them is a receptive bilingual and has not developed the French language skills. So what happens is that depending on which language the person being addressed to understands, these girls adjust their choice of language in accordance with that. So very clearly, they try to sort of like adjust to each other's bilingual proficiency. For instance, there might be when they're talking to this girl in English, for instance, and if the girl does not know English and she replies in Spanish, then even this is just accepted as a norm. So she's not pushed into saying things in English or in French, but her receptive bilingualism is accepted, and the time is given to this child to learn from other students as they speak their language in a natural context of communicating with each other. So translanguaging and learning go hand in hand because translanguaging gives this extra space to those learning another language to develop their vocabulary, develop their structures in a language that they don't fully know as yet.